Hi, welcome back for another weekend jewelry school. I'm Melissa Muir. Last week we talked a little bit about the cutters, and the previous week we talked about pliers, how to use them, what to look for, different shapes and styles. And this week I want to take that one step further and show you how to use a few of these pliers to create what I consider a very basic form that's kind of fundamental when you're making jewelry. And we are going to be doing eye pins and wrapped eye pins or wrapped loops. So there's a couple of different terms for those. And there's several different ways to create them, but I'm going to show you the way that I create them, and it makes it very, very simple. Let's check it out now. So first I want to show you a little bit about the tools that we are going to be using. I have round nose pliers, and you'll notice that I have two different pair here, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. I have a good pair of cutters. In this case it's a Tronex, which is a flush cut, and then I also have some chain nose or needle nose. These are not really needle nose, they are chain nose, and the difference between that is that the points would get a little finer. So this is a chain nose plier, and then finally I have a pair of flat nose pliers. And really, if you have just these four tools, so it doesn't matter which round nose pliers you have, but as long as you have a round, a chain, a flat, and some cutters, there's quite a bit that you can actually do in jewelry. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. In addition to that, I am using some craft wire, and in this case it has a coating. This is copper wire, and it has this coating. I bought this just over at the craft store. Super inexpensive, but very effective at helping you to learn how to do this properly, because this coating comes off very easily, and that can be a source of not only frustration, but it's also a great source of teaching, because if you can do all of these different techniques that I'm going to show you without knocking the coating off on this, then you know you're doing really well, and you're ready to tackle a ton of things. But the most important thing is that you will have mastered your pliers and how to hold them and how tight to hold them and how to manipulate that wire without mangling it. And that is your goal. When I'm teaching beginning jewelry classes, I will give my students a roll of this craft wire, and we're just going to cut off a small section of that. Once you become a little bit more well versed in this and you're starting to work with more precious materials, then a lot of times I work on the coil itself, and that way I don't lose as much material. But for right now, it's copper. We don't really care that much. The first thing we want to do is master an eye pin, and your ideal eye pin is going to be perfectly centered. Now, I told you that we had two pair of round nose pliers here, and the reason that I wanted to show you this is because between these two pair, my Tronex is a very fine tip, and my Wubbers, while it still comes to a fairly fine point, it's not nearly as fine as what is here on my Tronex. So another thing though that my Tronex does is that it does more fine gauge wire, whereas my Wubbers is really meant to handle those heavier gauge wires. So if you're working with, say, like 14 gauge, 16 gauge, 18 gauge, something like that, then you're going to want that stronger pair of needle nose, or the tapered nose on this round nose, rather the finer tips. A lot of times when I'm using these finer tips, if I'm using it on, say, 20 gauge and I'm working right at the very tip of that, there's not a lot of strength there. And it's not limited to the Tronex pliers. This is for any of them that have that really fine tip. And what happens is, as you're going and you're twisting your wire, and you'll see as we start to bring the wire around, then what happens is the nose on the pliers will actually twist, and that's just something that's very common. It is not unusual to have multiple pairs of round nose pliers, and it might be something that you'll want in your own studio. Now, the first thing we want to do is master creating a perfect loop right here, and to do this, you want to actually hold on to your wire with the tip of your pliers wherever you're going to create that loop. Now, obviously, the diameter of our nose here, this plier nose, is going to determine the size of our loop. But what I want to do is I want to hold this, but if I run my finger over it, I do not feel that wire, and that tells me that I'm at a really good spot. Now I'm going to hold really close to the nose of my pliers right here, and I am going to use my thumb and forefinger to actually wrap this around. Now, I'm going to show you guys my wrist. I can't go anymore. My wrist just won't turn that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to release a little bit here, and I'm going to bring my pliers back up to the top, because if I show you this, notice that I've not gone all the way around yet, and I need to. So I'm going to put my pliers back right there at the tip, and I've come back to the top, so my grip here is more natural. Before I was all the way down around this way, but now I want to be here. So what I'm going to do is come back up here to the top. Very gently, I'm holding this wire. I'm not gripping this really hard, but I'm going to continue to bring that wire around until I feel it hit itself. So you see how now we have like this perfect little P? Then what I need to do now is I'm going to bring this back in, and I'm going to put the tips of that needle, or of the round nose there, right there where the little P kind of connects, and I'm going to bend this wire back. So it kind of breaks the neck on that. Do you see that? And now we have a perfectly centered loop. Now if you find that it's still open just a little bit, I just put my nose back into this, and I just bring it back around until it closes out that little hole or gap. Okay, so that is what we want. When I'm teaching a beginning class, I make my students make about 20 or 30 of these, but they have to do 20 of them perfectly before we're ready to move on. And by the time you've done this 20 times, you get that muscle memory, and that's what you're really after. So here's how a lot of people will do this. They come in and they grab their wire. See how that little end right there sticks out? I don't want that, because let me show you what happens if I do. I'll bring that around, and now I have a teardrop. Now there are times that I want a teardrop, and again, even at that, I would still want to center that teardrop a little bit, so I would kind of create a little neck for that, but still you can see it's still off. This is a very, very poorly formed eye pin. All right, so we want to avoid that at all costs. So let me show you one more time how to create this. So again, I'm going to put my wire in. I'm going to hold it right up next to the nose of my pliers. And if it slips off, that actually kind of tells you you are in the right spot. And I'm going to bend this around. Notice that I use my thumb to keep it right here against the nose of my pliers. I'm going to bring this back up, and I'm going to bend it back around again until it touches. Perfect little zero there, or perfect little O. Put my pliers right back into the crook of that bend, and I'm going to create a little bit of a bend right there. And now we have another perfectly centered eye pin. Now to give you an idea, this is how I would use that little eye pin. Well, one way. Another way is that I use them all the time to create earrings or whatever else that I want to add little drops onto. But notice on this chain, all of these little eye pins are consistent. Now this is a great way to make a very fast, easy chain. However, this is not a secure chain. If I pull on this, it is going to break because this wire is just going to come undone. So let's talk about the next kind, which is a wrapped loop. And here is an example of a wrapped loop right here on the hook. This hook is quite secure. This would not come undone. In order for you to break this, the wire would either have to break right here, or more likely your hook would just kind of stretch out. And in this case, because we're just hooked into an eye pin or an eye loop, that eye loop would just open up. But this part right here is not going to break easily. So this is a secured wrapped loop. And let's learn how to do that one now. So now that you have seen how to create those eye pins, those are a great way to create a chain very, very simply and very easily. But you want to have sometimes a more secure connection. Plus you can also make it a little bit decorative. And that is going to be your wrapped loop. Now there's always a little saying that I used to say to my students that you do 2 times for sure and 3 to be secure. And that's talking about how many little wraps you create. And I'm going to show you guys that right now. So we're going to start off in a similar fashion. However, this time I'm going to come back just a little bit further. So once again, I'm going to use the nose of my pliers here, and I'm going to place them wherever I want, and I'm going to create a little loop. So see how we've got that little loop right there? Now I want this long end to be where everything is centered. So I'm going to, just like I did before, put my pliers back into that loop, and I'm going to give a little bend. So now you'll see that this circle is centered right over my wire here. At that point, I'm going to put the round nose pliers away for a minute, and I'm going to bring in either the flat nose pliers or my chain nose pliers. Either one will work, but what I want is that flat inside to my pliers. I don't want any grooves or roundness or anything like that, because what we are going to do is I'm going to hold on to this loop. So I'm just going to bring this, put the loop right into my jaw, and I'm going to hold it like this. Now I'm going to take this little tail and I'm going to wrap this tightly around my stem that I have created here with the long wire. And I'm going to create these little wraps, and I'm going to lay them down one next to each other so it creates a coil. Now here I have created 2 loops, 1, 2. So like I said, 2 to be secure, 3 to be sure, plus anytime you're doing any kind of art type of thing like this, an odd number is going to be more desirable just because visually it's more appealing. So now that I have 3 loops here, or 3 wraps, I'm going to trim away this end. Now when I do this, very rarely does this actually clip to a point where I don't have a little end sticking out here. Now hopefully you guys can see this little end that sticks out right here at this, and that is going to catch on things and it is painful. So what I want to do is take my pliers and I'm going to place one nose on the back side of this item that sticks up and one on the front, and I'm going to give a little squeeze and lay that down. And there is our wrapped loop. If things are a little off, so this one happens to be a little bit off center, then what I do is I bring my pliers back into this and I just kind of give a little twist and pull it back into place. Now here we have an example of a chain where I've created wrapped loops. So our first chain showed just the individual eye pins, or those eye loops that are not closed. And so again, you can kind of see how this chain is going to be far more secure than this chain. This chain, you pull it, it's just going to come undone. This one, you can pull and pull and pull, and if I eventually will be able to break it because I will be able to break the wire itself, but it's going to take a little bit of pressure to get that done. So this is something that you can do, and you'll notice that it ends up being a little bit more decorative on this item as well because of how I've been able to manipulate the ends of those wires. So that gives you an example there. Now let's say that you want to create like an earring or a drop pendant or something like that with these crystals. So what I would do is, first of all, if I put my wire or my beads on this wire, they're just going to come right off. I need to create a stopper. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my wire and I'm just going to bend it around, and then I'm going to squeeze it closed with my pliers. So I've kind of created a little bit of a loop, but not really a full loop. Then I'm going to thread my beads on, and I'm going to start with my little one first. and then I will go to my bigger one, like so. Now what I'm going to do with this is I need to create a little area that I can then wrap the wire around, and I do that with my chain nose pliers. Now if I come far back into the nose of my pliers, I'm going to have a larger area here above my bead, but I don't need too big of one. So I'm just going to stay here towards the beginning of these the needle or the chain nose pliers, and I'm just going to use my thumb to bend my wire right over the nose of those. Hopefully you guys can see that here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my round nose pliers, and I'm going to put it right into the bend of that kind of that neck that I've just created. And I'm going to bring my wire all the way around. Now, if I were to keep bending right here, which a lot of people do, they end up bending around both of them, and I no longer have an O, but a weird oblong thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pliers out, and I'm going to replace it back here at the top. So now I'm wrapping around the bottom, and I'm going to bring that around. So now I have my little O. And you'll see he's off a little bit. So what I do is put my pliers back inside and just bring it around until it's centered, which is now perfectly centered. So now I'm going to either switch to my flat nose or my chain nose. It doesn't matter as long as it's flat on the inside. Hold the loop, and I'm going to bring this wire around and loop this around itself so that these loops sit right next to each other, and we create a nice tight little coil. He's slippery on me tonight. And I'm just going to create this tight little coil. Now, another thing that you can do is make this more decorative. And to make this more decorative, what you will do is keep a hold of that loop, and you're just going to randomly wrap this wire up here at the top, like so. And if it gets too big, you can always take your pliers and adjust those. But now I have kind of this messy knot up here. And this wire is a little bit big for this particular treatment. I would have been better off to use something like 24 or even 22 gauge. This is 20 gauge wire that we're using. But it gives you kind of the idea. Then if you're going to do the messy one, it's kind of nice because all you have to do is trim your end. Use your chain nose pliers and tuck that little sharp end into that messy knot that you have just created, and you're all done. You know, and you can create any number of these, make your earrings, make pendants, whatever it's going to be. So I promise that if you go through and you learn these two loops, it is going to be a great foundation. You use this all of the time. Whenever you're creating maybe some hooks, or maybe you're creating the little earring drop or the pendant drops or anything like that, you will find that you are going to use these head pins or these eye pins, and then you can use them to connect different things together. So spend some time, learn how to do these. I hope that gives you guys some ideas of how you can use some wire to create some basic simple jewelry items. We will be doing a few more projects coming up soon, but first we have a few more things that we need to learn before we jump into that. But they're coming, I promise. As always, if you like my video and my channel, please subscribe. Anything that you can do helps me get those numbers up. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. Also, I love to have your comments. Be sure to leave them down below in the comment section. I do my best to reply to you as soon as I possibly can. And as always, you guys, I look forward to seeing you guys next week here at Weekend Jewelry School. Have a great weekend.